such a genuine gem, thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is the bizarre case of the Eriksson twins. Now, was this a madness shared by two? The twins seem to have a connection that is unlike any other, but when it is used for harm and chaos, it can really be double the trouble. Now, this case may technically be solved, but the real mystery lies in the why. Why did this ever happen? By the way, I post so much true crime content like this, so if it is something you are interested in, then I would love for you to subscribe down below, and a thumbs up would really help as far as showing your support. Now let's get into the story. So it was 2008 in Liverpool, England, and that May 17th, two women would be seen from the surveillance cameras surveying the M6 motorway, which is another word for highway. And these two women were walking along the median right in the middle of the highway that had this small barrier, but still no one was really allowed in the center of this highway, and this was causing cars to look at them and getting distracted while they were driving, and that was bad enough. But then these two women decided to jump the barrier of this median and run into the highway. Cars were swerving everywhere trying to miss them so they didn't hit these women, but they were going probably 60 miles an hour on this highway, and it was a little hard to stop so quickly. And in fact, one car even grazed one of the women. And at this point, the highway agency and the Central Motorway Patrol were all sent out to help the situation and hopefully get these women off the road. When they got there, however, they believed they would walk into a crime scene that was probably bloody. There was probably, a death involved. It's not something they wanted, but that's what they expected with two women running onto a highway full of cars. But when they got there, everything was really quite calm. They got these two women off to the side. They had already kind of moved to the shoulder themselves, and they kept them over there. They began talking to them, and it was really calm. These two women turned out to be twins named Ursula and Sabina Eriksson. And they were smoking their cigarettes, talking amongst each other, talking to the police officers, and really seemed like nothing was the matter, almost like they were just lost and had run out on the highway mistakenly. No one seemed to really be in a panic anymore, meaning the officers let their guard down. And Ursula, one of the twins, was going to take advantage of this. Almost out of nowhere, Ursula just darts back onto the highway from the shoulder where they were standing, and this police officer talking to the twins grabbed for her, but could only grab for her jacket, and she had wiggled out of it and ran straight into the highway into a truck that was going 60 miles per hour. Ursula's shoes were thrown across the road upon impact, and her legs were crushed, and if that wasn't shocking enough, then her twin sister Sabina would also run into the highway and come in a headfirst collision with a Volkswagen also going 60 miles per hour. She would run straight into the windshield, be thrown into the air, and smack back down on the pavement, going unconscious for 15 minutes. But strangely enough, these two women were still alive. And this had all been captured on camera, and not just the surveillance cameras. Yeah, that's right. They were filming a show. It was a new show that was called Motorway Cops, and they were following around the motorway officers, just seeing their everyday life experience, what they did on the job, and they just happened to capture this incredibly odd event that had happened. The motorway was completely shut down at this point, and the officers ran to help these two twins. Ursula, who was the one who was still conscious at this time, was not having it. She wanted nothing to do with these officers. She began screaming and spitting at them, saying that she recognized them and they weren't real. And when she started screaming this, out of nowhere, Sabina, who seemed to be unconscious before, suddenly woke up and started screaming, "They're going to steal your organs," to her sister, and they both proceeded to panic.
Shh. No, come on, my love, come on, you've hit your head, calm down. We are the police, calm down. Yeah, and the doctor's en route. It's okay, calm down.
Chill, okay?
They're gonna steal your organs!
Then Sabina, who was just unconscious, surprised everyone by getting up on her feet after she had just been hit by a car, and running off, calling for police. She was screaming at the top of her lungs for help, for the police to come, when the police were the ones trying to help her. She ended up turning to an officer who almost caught her, punching her in the face, knocking this officer to the ground, and jumping the barrier to go to the other side of the highway where the traffic hadn't been stopped. So she was running into traffic once again. 6 officers had to go to this other side of the highway to try to get Sabina to come with them. She had by this point taken off her coat and was ready to fight all 6 of them on her own. They surrounded her and eventually got her handcuffed, restrained, and sedated to take her to the ambulance that was there on the ground. Ursula, however, was in worse condition, and she was taken by air ambulance to another hospital to deal with her worsening condition. When Ursula got to this hospital, they tested her blood for any sort of drugs that she could possibly be on to have a reason for why they acted this way, and they found none. And this was so surprising to officers because these officers had been trying to get them to calm down and to just sit there and hang out, and they said that these women were so extremely strong, they were disoriented, and they just seemed like they were on something. But in Ursula's test, it came back as completely negative. And Sabina was actually released without having a test done because she seemed completely fine. She was released from the hospital 5 hours after that and was basically completely fine, not even asking for her sister or where she was or if she was okay or anything. Almost like she didn't have a sister by this point. But even though Sabina acted like she no longer really had a sister, she was going to have to talk to police for the both of them since her sister was still in the hospital. They took Sabina into custody, and she was being really funny and flirty and acted nothing like she had on this highway. She was even saying that she had never tried to harm herself, but they should have really listened closer to what Sabina was saying because this would come into effect later on. Sabina had said, "We say in Sweden that an accident rarely comes alone. Usually at least one more follows, maybe 2. And then Sabina was released the next day, May 19th, after pleading guilty to trespassing on the highway and hitting an officer, which they sentenced her to 1 day in custody. And then they said because of her processing the day before, she had already spent that day in custody and was basically free to go. And they did this, releasing her without doing a psych evaluation whatsoever. And as Sabina was released, she was suddenly very worried about where her sister was. She wanted to find Ursula, and so she set out to the city of Stoke-on-Trent and began to search for her sister. She was wearing Ursula's green top, and she had a plastic bag which was from the police department that contained an laptop that she had and $1,300 in cash, and that's all Sabina had. 7 p.m. Sabina would run into 2 men who were walking their dog home from a pub, and she would kind of call across the street to these men saying that she really liked their dog, and they would approach her and talk to her and let her pet this dog. These 2 men were Glenn Hollinshead and Peter Malloy, and Peter was the one that really saw how strange Sabina was acting. He said that she was acting very nervous, friendly, and would have a conversation, but very, very nervous, and was just kind of twitchy and was obviously had something wrong and had something on her mind. But Glenn, however, liked to see the good in people and really just thought she was a friendly woman wanting to pet his dog. At this point, Sabina asked these 2 men if there were any bed and breakfasts or hotels nearby that she could stay at, and feeling bad for her, Glenn offered her a stay at his house, which was nearby on Duke Street. Now, Glenn was a 54-year-old qualified paramedic and self-employed welder, and he really did want to help everybody. He was not the type to judge anybody, and so he was completely okay with this woman staying at his house. He didn't have any ill intention, and he also didn't think she had any. At this point, Sabina was relaxed, and she started telling the men that she was trying to find her sister at a hospital, and they were just having small talk. But by the time they got back to Glenn's house, the 3 of them, the odd behavior began again from Sabina. She was drinking with them, but also she would get up and go and look out the window periodically and just look around like she was looking for someone, like she thought someone was following her. And the two men noticed but didn't really say much, and at this point they were trying to make more conversation about her sister, and she didn't want anything to do with it. She didn't want to talk about her. She just wanted to be silent. Then after dinner, she offered these two men a cigarette from her own stash, and as soon as they put them to their mouths, she immediately grabbed the cigarettes back, saying that they couldn't have them because they might be poisoned. Peter chalked this up to being signs that she had left an abusive partner and was kind of just worried about this partner following her or finding her, and so he felt okay to leave, which he left around midnight that night. And Sabina stayed the night at Glenn's house. Everything went well, and the next morning, Sabina and Glenn would call around to the local hospitals and see if they could find Ursula. They had no luck, and by 7:40 that night for dinner, Glenn was making them a lovely dinner, and he went outside to his neighbor, who was Frank Booth. Frank Booth was out washing his car, and Glenn went up to him and asked for some tea bags. He didn't have any tea bags and wanted to see if he could borrow some. And Frank said, "Yeah, just give me a minute." And so Glenn went back inside. But it would only be a few moments later that Glenn would come back out, stumbling out on his front porch to tell Frank, "She has stabbed me. Please take care of my dog." Glenn then fell on the ground and passed away from 5 stab wounds, one being to the heart. Now, at this point, Frank did immediately call the police, and Sabina had already fled, but the thing was, they had captured her on CCTV footage basically the entire time she was running away, and what they saw was mind-boggling. She had carried a hammer from Glenn's home and was periodically stopping her run to beat herself in the head with it. There was actually a motorist who came by named Joshua who had seen her doing this and got out of his car to help her and to try to stop her from beating herself with a hammer. And at this point, Sabina fought back and took a broken roof tile out of her back pocket and hit him over the head with it, and then began to run away from him. But by this point, it had stalled her enough that the police were on her tail, and they were following her very closely. And this is when she came to a bridge, and it was Heron Cross, and she jumped from this bridge, which was a 40-foot tall bridge. And she only broke her ankles and fractured her skull. Yet again, this woman lived. Sabina was taken to the hospital while investigators went back to Glenn's house to find DNA evidence that could implement her in Glenn's murder. They found her evidence on the kitchen knife used to stab him, and also she had blood from Glenn on her shirt and on her ring and inside of it. And so they really had a ton of evidence against her, but it would take until that September, when she was better and out of the hospital, that she would be taken into custody immediately. September 11th, Sabina was charged with murder, and around the same time her sister Ursula was also getting out of the hospital. She had been in the hospital continuously this entire time, getting better, and around the same time she got out and was actually able to go back home because she hadn't murdered anybody. But Sabina, who was now being questioned, would not say anything about why she did it, why she killed Glenn. 2 psychiatrists tested her for her trial, and they came to the same conclusion that she was mentally ill, but there were lots of different ideas on how she was mentally ill. One said that she actually heard voices in her head that made her do this. The other was that she had an induced delusional disorder. And another one was one that is very hard to pronounce, folie à deux, and it is the madness of two, which is when basically one person suffers from a psychotic illness and someone who is very close to them takes on the same symptoms and basically enters a psychosis with them. And it was thought that maybe Ursula had the psychotic illness to begin with, and Sabina kind of followed suit. But on September 2nd of 2009, Sabina actually had pled guilty to manslaughter with diminished responsibility and never explained her actions. She was sentenced to 5 years in a women's prison. Yeah, only 5 years, but apparently had begun taking up Christianity while she was inside the prison. It was doing really well, which I think is strange that she took up Christianity, and then her sister, Ursula, who had been released from the hospital, she had undergone a 3-month psychiatric program before going home. And when she went home, she began to go to church at a Sacred Heart church and has never really been in anything as far as in the media or criminal activity that I can find. But Sabina was actually released on parole in 2011 for good behavior, and her whereabouts are unknown today. There's not much really talked about, and I'm hoping that that means that she's gotten better. Glenn's family, who was obviously very angered by the fact that she only got 5 years and then she was released so soon, but they were even more angered that nothing had been done on the first incident, the motorway incident, because there was footage from this show that was being filmed that was said to be cut out of the end cut. And this was of officers saying that they had a 136, or basically saying that these women needed to be taken to a place of safety under the Mental Health Act.
This one?
Yeah.
Is she under arrest at the moment?
Well, 136 if she is.
Well, she needs to be, for if nothing else, for going on the carriageway and for her own safety.
Meaning that these officers knew they needed more help and didn't do anything about it at that time, which could have saved Glenn from having to have his life taken so tragically. And if you go back in the timeline, before all of this happened, there was actually another incident with these twins that was overlooked by police with their odd behavior. You see, these two girls were identical twins born on November 3rd of 1967 in Sweden. They had an older sister named Mona and an older brother named Bjorn. Not much is known about their childhood except for the fact that there was really no mental illness apparent. They were pretty kept to themselves in school, and then in 2000 Ursula was actually living in the United States and Sabina was living in Ireland with her husband and 2 children. These twins really didn't have a very close connection growing up like most twins do, but strangely enough, in May of 2008, when Ursula visited Sabina and her family, they instantly had this connection that is normal with twins, and it was so strange. They were in their mid-30s by this point, and they were inseparable during this visit. And then on May 16th, these 2 twins left Ireland and headed via ferry to Liverpool, England. And the first thing they did when they arrived the next day at about 8:30 was go to a police station. And there they would say that they were worried about Sabina's children being with her husband and their safety. So the officers in Liverpool called back to the officers in Ireland and sent someone to see her husband and the kids to make sure everything was okay. And everything was. I mean, Sabina was the one who left them, and it turned out the kids were fine, her husband was fine, and her husband even admitted that the night before they left, they had had sort of an argument between the 2 of them. But it was unsure why they really left or why she would feel the need to go to the police station and say this. By 11:30 that same morning, the twins were headed on a National Express coach and they were headed to London. This is where their odd behavior would be even more amplified for the first time. The twins were clutching their bags in their arms and just holding them so tightly. They wouldn't let anybody put them away. They wouldn't let anybody touch them. They didn't want to talk. They were just to themselves clutching their bags, which looked very odd, and it made everyone on board very suspicious and a little nervous. And at this point, they stopped at Kiel's service station, and this was not a scheduled rest stop. And the bus driver said that he ultimately stopped there to get the twins off. And when they tried to reboard, he told them, okay, you can if you let us look inside your bag to make sure nothing is illegal or harmful. And when the twins refused to do this, he refused to let them back on. However, a police report, because the police actually had to come and search them, the police report says that they had chosen to get off because they were feeling ill. But when the police got there, they talked to these women and they decided that they were harmless and just let them go. And Keel's service station offered them another coach to go on that they were scheduled to go on, but instead of waiting for that, they just decided to start walking down the median of the highway themselves. Their older brother Bjorn claimed that the reason these two girls were running along the highway with traffic coming at them was that they were fleeing from maniacs, but he could never explain what he meant, who was really after them, and no one appeared to be after them in the security tapes. But I would love to know what in the world you think happened with these women, and do you think it really was madness by two? That whole concept really intrigues me, and if Ursula was the original patient suffering with psychosis, that would make sense considering she was the first one to run out on the highway and get hit by the car, and then Sabina followed. But if so, then was Ursula telling her to kill Glenn, or was that something that she just, I guess telepathically she would have had to be telling her because she didn't see her when she did it, but was there like a deeper connection telepathically, or what was going on? The whole thing just really creeps me out. Or was it really just like a twin thing that caused them to act the same way, and just as they got older it became stronger? Sabina really appeared to be able to turn it off and on. She could be screaming and hitting everybody, and then flirting and being so sweet and kind the next, and then going to this person's house and acting really paranoid, and then acting fine, and then killing him. There was a lot of off and on and off and on, and it didn't seem like she was all the time in this state. And Ursula, after the whole highway accident, appeared to everybody to completely come out of it fine. She wasn't at all affected afterwards. It didn't seem, or I didn't read anything about after she got out of the hospital. She went to church and was completely fine. That makes me believe maybe Sabina was the original sufferer of the psychosis, and Ursula was perhaps the one who fell into it with her after going to visit her. I don't know. Man, this is just a strange one, and when I was reading about it, I was like, I have to do this because it's just, we love the strange and unusual here on this channel, and I figured you guys would really love this case. I do feel horrible that Glenn had to be taken advantage of when he was really just trying to be a good guy. That breaks my heart. But what really scares me even more is that they are out in the world now, just doing their own thing. I'll leave you with that. Don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.